Hi there. My name is Leslie Struck, and I'm the curator of the archive at Fort Collins Museum of Discovery. Perhaps you have heard of this little bit of local historical trivia. Hattie McDaniel, one of the stars of the 1939 film Gone with the Wind, and the first African American to win an Academy Award, once lived in Fort Collins, Colorado. Well, this little bit of trivia is true, and my goal with this presentation is to explore Hattie McDaniel's life in Fort Collins and Colorado. I'll also touch on what she was most famous for, her life in Hollywood. Hattie McDaniel was born on June 10, 1895 in Wichita, Kansas, the 13th and youngest child of Susan Holbert McDaniel and Henry McDaniel. Hattie's mother and father were both born into slavery. In 1863, Henry McDaniel enlisted in the Union Army during the Civil War. In the course of his service, he suffered injuries that would plague him for years. And, like many Black Americans at this time, the McDaniel family struggled with the after effects of slavery combined with limited opportunities, relentless poverty, and repeated encounters with racism and bigotry. The longing for a better life led the McDaniel family to head west at the turn of the 20th century. From around 1901 to 1903, they made their home in Fort Collins, Colorado, at this house pictured here. This is 317 Cherry Street, which is about a 5-minute walk from Fort Collins Museum of Discovery. And this photo is from 1968. Susan and Henry, with the kids, Otis, Sam, Etta, and Hattie, lived in this home for about a year and a half. While in Fort Collins, Hattie's father, Henry McDaniel, became a member of the George H. Thomas Post No. 7 of the Grand Army of the Republic, or GAR. The GAR was a fraternal organization that advocated for veterans, including Black veterans, of the Civil War. Here we can see traces of the McDaniel family in Fort Collins through some primary sources in the archives collection. Here's the letterhead from the local Fort Collins GAR chapter, and these recorded entries from 1902 show that Henry McDaniel paid his annual GAR dues of $1.50. This photo of Henry McDaniel was likely taken in Denver in the early 1900s after an annual meeting of the GAR. You can just make out one of his GAR medals that he's wearing on his lapel. Both Henry and Susan lived in Colorado for the rest of their lives. They are both buried in the Riverside Cemetery in Denver. We also get a glimpse of Hattie's life in Fort Collins from the memories of her childhood friend Ruth Colomer, who lived nearby on Meldrum Street. When writing a biography of Hattie McDaniel in the late 1980s, historian Carlton Jackson reached out to Ruth to ask her about her memories of her friend Hattie back in the early 1900s. Ruth said that she and Hattie were inseparable and walked with each other every morning hand in hand to Franklin School, where they were both third graders. They played jacks on Fort Collins flagstone sidewalks in a game called Pom Pom Pull-Away. Hattie taught Ruth how to bounce a rubber ball while repeating the rhythm, 1, 2, buckle my shoe. Ruth told how she and Hattie would pick flowers and hop through the fields, and described her friend as wearing a dainty ruffled bonnet and one of the biggest smiles a girl could acquire. This photo, courtesy of Jim Burrell, shows Ruth Colomer when she was a child. And here's a view of Franklin School, which was at the southwest corner of Howe Street and Mountain Avenue. This photo is from the late 1800s. The school was demolished in 1956. Hattie McDaniel's teacher, Louise Leggett, also spoke of Hattie, noting that Hattie was the only Black student in her class, of about 60 pupils. She said Hattie stood out, showed a remarkable talent for dramatics, and the other children almost worshipped her. This photo is the only one I am aware of that shows Hattie McDaniel in Fort Collins. She's circled here in the back row, pictured with other students at Franklin School in about 1903. This image is courtesy of Helen Aiken Day and was featured in the 1987 book, The History of Larimer County, Volume 2. All the members of the McDaniel family living in Fort Collins were talented. Hattie's mother sang and her father played the banjo, and her siblings were gifted performers. Hattie's brothers, Sam and Otis McDaniel, are mentioned here in an article from the Fort Collins Weekly Courier newspaper in 1903. They were featured local talent when a traveling group called the Black 400 visited the Opera House on College Avenue. Otis and Sam performed the cakewalk, a dance with complex steps and turns and deep roots in the African American community. The other dancers mentioned included Lily, Jesse, and William Clay, who were all African Americans living in Fort Collins at that time. We have photos in the archive of William and Lily in Fort Collins, and all of these images here are from the 1890s. So far, most of what is revealed about Hattie's life in Fort Collins seems largely positive. She had a great best friend, was admired by her classmates, and the talents of her brothers were even acknowledged in the local paper. But in this next blurb about Otis McDaniel from the 1903 Fort Collins Weekly Courier, we see a degrading caricature of Hattie's brother. Referencing Otis's reaction to a fire in the town, the newspaper quotes him with derogatory dialect. I'm not comfortable reading this aloud, but I will show the image of the article here. This small article offers a window into the kinds of bigotry and stereotyping commonly faced by African Americans at this time. This window into the Black experience in Fort Collins in the 1900s is very limited. Part of this is due to the small African American population in Fort Collins at that time. The 1900 census shows only 15 Black individuals living here. The 1910 census shows 25. The majority of Fort Collins Black community in the early 1900s lived in Hattie's neighborhood around Maple, Cherry, and Melbourne streets. But the other reason we struggle to know more about experiences of Black Americans is the hole in the archival record. This lack of documents, images, and artifacts is referred to as an archival silence, an instance in which people or events are not well represented in the historical record. Like many historical archives, our records often reflect the dominant historical narrative, and that does not always include the histories of women or minorities. This lack of information serves as a wake-up call, an opportunity for us to collect and share records that fill these archival silences. More work needs to be done to document and share the Black experience in Fort Collins past and today. By the end of 1903, the McDaniel family had left Fort Collins and settled in Denver. Hattie attended Denver East High School, where she won a gold medal during an oratorial contest put on by the Women's Christian Temperance Union. She was the only Black contestant. By 1911, Hattie had left high school and dedicated her life to performing. Hattie and her siblings gained attention on the Denver vaudeville scene. The Denver Star newspaper featured this notice here in the center from 1915 that highlights the female minstrels, an act created by Hattie and her sister Etta. They were a sensation, performing primarily to Black audiences with plots centered on women that spoofed the stereotypical blackface minstrel shows. At this point, Hattie was married to Howard Hickman, a talented musician who played piano for silent films in Denver theaters. Sadly, Howard died of pneumonia in 1915, leaving Hattie a widow at age 21. She would marry 3 more times in her life. We know that Hattie returned to Fort Collins at least once to perform. This notice in the Fort Collins Express-Courier from 1925 shows that she appeared at the Empress Theater at 193 North College with Professor George Morrison and his super orchestra. Throughout the 1910s and 20s, Hattie was working at a grueling pace, touring as a performer throughout Colorado, the West Coast, and Canada. She also pursued a career in radio and claimed to be the first Black woman to sing on the airwaves when she appeared on Denver's KOA in 1925. Hattie was also a prolific songwriter. She wrote and performed many blues songs, though only a handful of her recordings survive today. By 1931, Hattie McDaniel set her sights on the silver screen and moved to Hollywood, California. It's estimated that she appeared in over 300 movies, honing her Mammy character, a tough, sassy servant that was simultaneously groundbreaking due to Hattie's talented handling of such a role, and troubling in how it reinforced racist stereotypes. This screenshot here from the 1934 movie Judge Priest shows Hattie in the stereotypical Mammy costume. This film would be the first time she got real professional recognition in Hollywood. However, the credits list her as Hattie McDaniels, a mistaken spelling that would be repeated many times throughout her career. Hattie's performance as Mammy in the 1939 film Gone with the Wind earned her an Oscar for her Best Supporting Actress. She was the first African American actress to receive an Academy Award and is best remembered for this achievement, though she was relegated to a segregated table at the awards ceremony. Whoopi Goldberg would be the next Black actress to win an Academy Award in 1990. Hattie continued to act for over a decade beyond this award. Her last major role as the star of the radio and television series Beulah in the late 1940s and early 1950s. But after suffering from breast cancer, diabetes, and heart problems, Hattie McDaniel died on October 26, 1952. She was 57 years old. The obituary shown here was printed in the Fort Collins, Coloradoan newspaper and mentions that her old best friend Ruth Colomer had visited Hattie in California at some point in the past. Like many historical figures, Hattie's legacy is complex. She frequently clashed with the NAACP for accepting roles and perpetuating myths that were degrading toward African Americans. But she had support for her work from those who understood the limitations of what was available and promoted by white-dominated show business. She is said to have quipped many times, "I'd rather play a maid than be a maid," and is also quoted as saying, "I have never apologized for the roles I play." She argued that she not only fought against offensive dialect in her movies, but also cracked open doors that had previously been shut to fellow Black performers. As stated by Jill Watts, author of the 2005 book Hattie McDaniel, Black Ambition, White Hollywood, McDaniel's film work endures and compels Americans to continue to confront, one way or another, issues of race and racism. Perhaps the changes that Hattie McDaniel had unquestioningly hoped for will come. Today, a plaque marks her childhood home at 317 Cherry Street in Fort Collins. If you visit, please do be respectful of the current owners. And while it's true that Hattie doesn't live there anymore, she still captures our imaginations and raises conversations about race in America more than 80 years after her most famous role.